The year is 1776, and America has fully committed to the Revolutionary War. We are over a year removed from Bunker Hill, and peace is no longer a viable option. The Continental Army had captured Boston, securing the heart of the Revolution, and General Howe, amassing a large army at Staten Island, looks for a chance to strike back. General Washington, fearing a British attack on New York City itself, marched his army down from Boston with haste. Ahead of him was General Charles Lee, who had constructed ample defenses in the city itself and secured its loyalty. While the Continental Congress had permitted Washington to raise an army of nearly 30,000 men, when he arrived in New York, with him marched less than 20,000. On August 1st, British generals Clinton and Cornwallis arrived with nearly 3,000 men to accompany Howe's force on Staten Island, which now matched Washington's in size. By the 12th, the British had over 30,000 men on Staten Island, and Washington, knowing his army was outsized, feared a diversionary attack, and so split his army between Long Island and Manhattan. 2 days later, the British Army landed an advanced force of 4,000 men, and by noon, nearly 15,000 British men and cannon had landed. Cornwallis pushed hastily, advancing 6 miles to Flatbush and setting up camp. Washington received word of this attack and decided to send reinforcements to counteract the landing. However, Washington was told that only 8,000 men had landed, so he sent only 1,500 reinforcements, bringing the total on Long Island to 6,000. Later in the day, the British received 5,000 Hessian reinforcements, and now numbered 20,000 men on Long Island compared to the American army of 6,000. At this point in the day, the commanding officer of the American forces was Israel Putnam, due to a recall and a replacement earlier in the campaign. The American forces planned to establish a perimeter at Brooklyn Heights, occupying the surrounding hills to prevent an advance. 3 detachments of less than 1,000 men were dispatched to hold various roads, and 6,000 men remained at Brooklyn Heights. The American forces, short on manpower, decided to leave the Jamaica Pass undefended, due to its relative obscurity and lack of popularity as a path to Brooklyn Heights. However, British loyalists who came out of hiding to support the British had made Clinton aware of this, and he moved to exploit the weakness. On the night of the 26th of August, 6,000 British under General James Grant moved to flank through Jamaica Pass, and 4,000 Hessians under Philip von Heister were on the march to frontally assault American-held heights. By the dark of night, the British moved with bayonets fixed, and the British had nominally reached Jamaica Pass without any American resistance. By 9 p.m., they were finally in position, and at night, the battle began. It was around 1 a.m. when the British first met the enemy, and American picket lines engaged, but quickly fled after their major was captured by advancing British bayonets and the force of British discipline. By 3 a.m., the General Putnam was awake and aware of the British advance, and General William Alexander, known as Lord Stirling, with 1,600 men under his command, was informed to reinforce positions north of Gowanus Road. A small contingent, about 1/6 of his force, was set up south of the road to screen the British advance. In an attempt to outflank the Americans, the British moved to take the grove southeast of their position, but American forces assaulted and repelled the British advance at Battle Pass. The British had actually succeeded in taking the position, but the Americans then engaged in a ferocious melee offensive and drove them back. The Americans, in the confusion of battle, thought they had killed the British general, but instead had only killed a colonel by the same name. It was around this time that the Hessians, now ready for their assault, and hearing the British guns signaling their advance, began their push forward, attacking along the Battle Pass line of control under the defense of General John Sullivan. It was here that Sullivan made a crucial and critical mistake, diverting a majority of his army to fight the British force, only leaving a small guard against the Hessians. Sullivan's men then fled or were killed, and Sullivan himself was captured while leading his men to a successful retreat of Brooklyn Heights. It was only after the capture of General Sullivan and the loss of Gowanus Road that Washington finally arrived at the battle lines and realized this was not a diversionary attack, quickly ordering reinforcements from New York City. The Americans had held their lines for almost 2 hours against the British on Battle Pass and Block Hill, but Stirling was forced to pull back after the Hessians hit his flank. As Stirling was forced to retreat with only one line of escape, one of the few bright lights shine through the clouds of the American day. He ordered the men of the Maryland Regiment to hold the line. These 300 men faced almost 2,000 British Marines in cannon fire and actually led an assault on their positions. This forlorn hope of a charge led the remaining 1,200 men to successfully escape, and of the nearly 300 men who held that line, only 12 made it back to the American defenses at Brooklyn Heights. Accounts differ to the reasoning, but Howe refused to follow up on his victory at Battle Pass, potentially fearing another Bunker Hill assault. Later, it was claimed by Howe to Parliament that he had done this to spare British lives. And it was true. The British could not as easily replace their casualties as the Americans did. The Americans being right there around the area could replace casualties while Howe had to wait for them to return from England. But whatever the case, Washington now looked from his position at Brooklyn Heights eagerly and fearfully. But then he realized that the British weren't preparing for a battle. They were preparing for a siege. With the river to his back, he knew he'd be trapped on Long Island if he stayed. So, throughout the night, echoing something that would happen much later in the campaign, American forces evacuated their fortified positions on a night crossing of a river, and all men were successfully evacuated before midnight. Now, in a fortified position of defense in Manhattan, Washington licked his wounds and pondered how to act next. This is the first video in my Defense of the Republic series. I'll be going over the Battle of Long Island, the Battle of Harlem Heights, and the 10 crucial days that followed that led to foreign intervention in America's Revolution. As always, feel free to comment, rate, and subscribe. And if you like these videos, consider subscribing for historical documentaries and alternate history scenarios weekly. Thank you for watching.